on the second Sunday of May. While other mothers were unwrapping scented candles and reading heartfelt cards, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, scraping burnt egg off a Castilian pan. The morning sun poured through the east-facing window, landing on the old oak table I once sanded with my husband. My son Ethan was sitting across from me, scrolling on his phone. He hadn't said a word, not even a simple Happy Mother's Day. I waited, thinking maybe he was tired, maybe he'd forgotten and would remember in the next few minutes. But silence filled the space between us, louder than any insult. When he finally looked up, he didn't smile, he didn't say thank you. He just said, "You didn't have to cook, Mom. We're grabbing lunch with Jenna's parents anyway." And just like that, something cracked inside me. It didn't shatter with rage or explode in tears. It split slowly, like a hairline fracturing glass. Quiet, precise, unnoticed by anyone but me. My name is Irene Whitmore. For most of my life, I was just Calvin's wife, Ethan's mom. And for a long time, that was enough. We had built this house and this life from the ground up, nail by nail, blister by blister. It was never fancy, but it was ours. When Calvin passed, I held the place together with duct tape, coffee, and casseroles. I never asked for much. I believed that someday Ethan would come back with not just his body, but his heart too. But that morning, something changed. That quiet moment became the beginning of a different story. A story not about being seen, but about finally seeing myself. Before that morning, I used to believe that love was something you proved with patience and persistence. Calvin and I had nothing when we started, just a patch of dry Missouri land, a second-hand truck, and a promise to build something that would last longer than either of us. We cleared the trees ourselves, dug fence posts in the heat, and raised chickens in a coop we built from salvaged wood. Every blister, every sunburn, every dent in the barn door told a story. Calvin used to say, "If the land holds the love, the rest will grow." And it did. Slowly, quietly, it grew. When Ethan was born, everything changed. That land became more than dirt. It became memory. I rocked him to sleep on the porch swing, Calvin hung by hand. I taught him how to ride a bike between the rows of young apple trees we planted one spring. After every hike, I de-sit him on the porch and picked ticks from his hair while he told me stories about frogs and pirate ships. We laughed easily back then, even when money was tight. When Calvin got sick, it happened fast. First, he slowed down. Then the appointments started. Then, the silence between us got heavier, filled with unsaid things. And then, one day, it was just me. I didn't crumble. I didn't run to anyone for help. I paid the taxes. I kept the chickens fed. I fixed the pipes when they froze. I mended what broke and patched what tore. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because I didn't know how to be anything else. I believed Ethan would come home, not just for holidays, not just for quick visits with half-finished conversations. I believed one day he'd come back with understanding, that he'd remembered this house wasn't just shelter. It was sweat. It was sacrifice. When he was little, Ethan used to leave me notes, tiny scraps of paper folded into triangles and slipped under my pillow. "You're the best mum in the world," written in crooked letters with backwards S. I saved every one of them. They re-still in a shoebox in the back of the closet, wrapped in rubber bands next to his baby blanket. And even when he forgot to call on my birthday, even when he married Jenna and she started calling me Irene like I was a co-worker, I held on, because mothers hold on until they can't. That Mother's Day morning should have been simple. I had woken up early, warmed the cinnamon rolls Ethan used to beg for as a child, and set out his favorite blue mug. I even put a little vase of fresh wildflowers on the table. I wanted to believe, even after everything, that this day could still mean something. They arrived late. Ethan walked in first, his phone pressed to his ear, barely nodding. "Hello." Jenna followed, already texting. The kids ran past me without a word, fighting over a tablet before their shoes even came off. I stood there with a dish towel in my hands, smiling like it didn't sting. Ethan tossed his keys on the counter and said, "You didn't have to cook." "Mum, we're heading to brunch with Jenna's parents in a bit." I nodded, forcing the words out. "It's just nice to see you." We sat down. They ate quickly. Jenna picked at her eggs like she was doing community service, and the kids were glued to their screens. I tried to ask them about school, about their hobbies, anything. Every answer was short, distracted, as if I was furniture. Then it happened. Ethan laughed at something his friend, who had tagged along, had said. He gestured casually around the room and said, "This place. Oh, it's just Mom's up for now. We've got plans for the land once it's transferred." I froze. He said it like it was already decided, like I was a tenant waiting to be evicted. And then he looked straight at me and added, "I mean, let's be honest. Mom's past the stage where she can really manage all this. She's done her part, done my part. Like I was a retired employee being quietly phased out. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just smiled like I didn't hear it. I cleared the plates no one had thanked me for and watched their car disappear down the gravel road without even a glance back. If you've ever had your life's work reduced to a throwaway sentence, you know the kind of silence that follows. It's not just disappointment. It's a kind of grief for a version of yourself that they no longer see. A grief that simmers quietly with no one to acknowledge it. That day, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. They weren't planning to include me in the next chapter of the story. They already thought I was the ending. And worst of all, I had been waiting, still holding on, still hoping for people who had already turned the page. After that day, things didn't fall apart in some dramatic way. There were no shouting matches or slammed doors, just small, steady shifts. A message left unread, a phone call that rang too long before going to voicemail, the way Ethan started answering texts with just a thumbs-up emoji. 2 weeks later, Jenna sent a group message me, Ethan, and her sister, oddly enough, about a fun little idea she had. She wrote, "We've been thinking the Backacre could be perfect for a rustic glamping cafe. Super cute, totally Instagrammable. Could even do wedding photos out there. Imagine the potential." There was no, "What do you think, Irene?" No. "Would this bother you?" Just assumption wrapped in exclamation points. Then, one afternoon, I saw a car I didn't recognize pull into the driveway. A man in khakis stepped out, clipboard in hand. I watched from the kitchen window as he walked the fields that Calvin and I had once planted together, shoulder to shoulder. He pointed at the apple trees like they were obstacles, not memories. Not the living legacy of two people who had poured everything they had into this land. Ethan didn't even knock, not even to say hi. That night, I asked gently, "Are you planning something with the land, sweetheart?" Ethan didn't look up from his phone. "We're just modernizing it, Mom, making use of it. Dad always wanted it to stay in the family." I nodded. But inside, the words twisted, because what he really meant was this. You're not part of what we call family anymore. Not the kind that gets consulted. You're just here. I had become background noise, a fixture like the porch swing no one sat on anymore. Then came my youngest granddaughter's birthday party. I spent 2 months hand-stitching a quilt each square, made from something meaningful. A patch of Ethan's old baby blanket, a piece from Calvin's favorite flannel shirt, even a corner from the apron I wore every Christmas morning. I folded it neatly, tied it with ribbon, and brought it with quiet pride. The little girl opened it, blinked, then turned to her new light-up unicorn toy without a word. Jenna smiled politely and said, "Oh, that's lovely. We'll find a spot for it eventually." Then she added with a laugh, "She's really into glow-in-the-dark stuff now." I held that quilt on my lap the entire party. No one noticed. Later, alone in the car, I cried. Not because they didn't like the gift, but because they didn't see it. They didn't see me. It wasn't rejection through anger. It was something colder, erasure through indifference. They weren't pushing me out. They had simply stopped noticing I was ever in. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I went up to the attic looking for my old recipe box. The one with Calvin's handwriting in the margins and oil stains from decades of Sunday dinners. I was craving a distraction, something to ground me, something that reminded me of when I was still needed. While digging through storage bins and dusty holiday decorations, I stumbled on a fireproof folder tucked behind an old trunk. I almost didn't notice it. Calvin had always kept our important documents in their insurance papers, wills, tax forms. I hadn't touched it in years. I sat down on the wooden floorboards, light pouring in through the tiny attic window, dust swirling like mist. I opened the folder and flipped through papers until my hand stopped on something that made me forget how to breathe for a moment. The land was still in my name, just mine. It hadn't been transferred. It hadn't been promised. For all of Ethan's confident talk, Dad wanted this and were going to modernize. He had never once asked me who legally owned the land. He had just assumed, like so many people do, when someone stays quiet too long. I sat there holding that piece of paper, and I heard Calvin's voice in my memory, not in a ghostly way, but clear, steady, and just a little amused, like he always sounded when trying to get a point across without pushing too hard. "If you ever feel like you're being faded out, Irene," he had once said, "just remember you helped build all of this. You get to decide how your story ends." That sentence hit me like a gust of wind through a closed window. I sat there for a long time with that deed in my lap, finally letting myself think the thing I had been avoiding for months. I was no longer part of Ethan's future. I was just a placeholder, a bridge he planned to walk across and then tear down behind him. They had already moved on. I was the only one pretending we were still standing in the same life together. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I made tea. I folded laundry. I watched the sun set behind the same apple trees Calvin had planted the year Ethan was born. But the silence in the house felt different. It wasn't the silence of being ignored anymore. It was the stillness that comes before a decision. You know, the kind when the birds stop chirping, the breeze holds its breath, and the whole world pauses just long enough for you to hear yourself think. I looked around the house and realized something painful but clear. This was no longer a home. It was a museum to a version of me that no one came to visit. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for them to remember I existed and start remembering it myself. The morning after I found the deed, I called a real estate agent in the next town over. Her name was Tysa Blake. She didn't ask many questions, just listened quietly when I said, "I want this done, Loki." No signs, no open houses, just clean and quiet. 3 weeks later, I signed the paperwork. The buyers were a retired couple from Colorado. They promised to keep the apple trees. That was enough. Because if he had really seen me, if he had been paying attention at all, he would have known it was never his. On the morning I left, I walked through each room like I was saying goodbye to a version of myself. I ran my fingers over the walls I once painted at midnight, smoothed the quilt folded at the foot of my bed, opened the kitchen cabinet where I used to hide ginger snaps just for Ethan, back when he thought cookies were magic. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote him a letter. Just 1 page. No anger, no drama. You assumed Ethan and I let you. But this home was never promised to you. It was built, cared for, and protected by me. And I've decided to let it go before it becomes something I don't recognize. You won't find me here. I've chosen to stop waiting to be seen. I'm not disappearing. I'm just becoming. I placed the letter under the old ceramic vase he never noticed was cracked. Then I grabbed my bags and left without a sound. The Ozark Mountains welcomed me like an old friend. I found a small cottage at the edge of a lake, 1 bedroom, peeling shutters, a porch swing that creaked just enough. I planted lavender in chipped pots, hung Calvin's wind chimes, and for the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I closed our old joint account, opened a new one in my name, sent a quiet donation to a women's shelter to counties over. In the memo line I wrote, "From a friend who finally walked away." It took Ethan 3 weeks to notice I was gone. He called twice. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" And then a text the next day. "Heard something about the farm. Call me." I didn't. Not out of spite. I just didn't have anything left to explain. On the 4th week, a Navy pickup pulled into the gravel drive of my new cottage. I was trimming lavender near the porch when I saw him. Same truck, same uncertain posture. He stood at the gate like a boy, too big to not. I didn't move. Finally, he stepped forward. "You really sold it?" he asked. "I did," I said, not cold, just clear. He looked down at his shoes. "I thought it was mine." "I know," I said quietly. "You never asked. You just assumed." He looked up at me, then really looked. Not past me, not through me, at me. The woman who raised him. The one who used to rock him through colic and cheer his spelling tests. "I didn't mean to make you feel forgotten," he said, barely above a whisper. "But I did," I answered, calm and steady. "And the thing is, I let you for a long time." He sat on the porch step. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. We both knew this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. "I didn't expect this," he said after a long silence. "No one does," I replied. "No one expects the quiet ones to leave. Not until they already have." We sat like that for a while, saying nothing, listening to the lake breathe. Then I said, "I'm not angry, Ethan. I'm not here to punish you, but I'm also not here to be convenient." He nodded, and for once, he didn't have anything to say. After a long pause, I stood up and went inside. When I came back, I handed Ethan a sealed envelope. "This explains where the rest of my assets went," I said. "You're not cut out, but you're not the center either." He held the envelope carefully, like it might break. He didn't open it, didn't argue. Before he stood to leave, I asked, "Would you like some tea?" His eyebrows lifted slightly, caught off guard after everything. He hadn't expected kindness. "I'm not bitter," I said. "I'm just careful now." We sat in silence, sipping tea on the porch. The breeze stirred Calvin's old wind chimes above us. Ethan didn't speak. I didn't ask him to. When he finally rose to go, he looked back at me just once before walking down the gravel path. No hug, no apology, no promises. But that single glance over his shoulder told me something had landed. Maybe not understanding, but recognition. And for now, that was enough. Later that evening, I stood by the railing, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The garden was beginning to bloom. The lavender, still young, leaned gently in the wind. The sky turned a soft orange, and the chimes sang a familiar tune I hadn't heard in years. No one knew where I was, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel lost. I felt found because this wasn't about disappearing. It was about reclaiming. It was about saying, "I am still here." Not by shouting, but by living fully, quietly on my own terms. No permission asked, none needed. That night, as the sky faded into deep blue and the last notes of the wind chimes echoed across the water, I thought about everything I had given, everything I had let slip through my hands in the name of love, patience, and duty. And I realized something simple but powerful. I was never erased in a single moment. It happened slowly through assumptions, through silence, through the ease of being overlooked, not because I didn't matter, but because I made it too easy not to ask if I did. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being forgotten by people you never thought would forget you. And yet there's a particular kind of peace that comes from walking away, not to punish, not to make a point, but to remember who you were before you became only someone else's anchor. I sent one last note, a quiet one, with a small donation to a women's shelter to counties over. I signed it simply, from a friend who finally remembered her name. Each morning now, I brew coffee in my little cottage. I sit by the window. I listen to the trees. I write things down, not for anyone else, just for me. No more waiting for someone to call. No more holding space for people who won't notice if it disappears.